The Brotherhood of the Silent Blade. Chapter 8, Shadows Reforged. The ravine was quiet except for the faint rustle of the wind and the low murmur of voices. Shadows stretched long over the scattered remnants of the Brotherhood, their figures outlined by the dim glow of dying embers. They had survived the king's assault, but the toll was visible in every strained movement and haunted stare. Aldric wiped the blade of his sword clean with a torn piece of cloth, his hands steady despite the ache in his shoulders. His gaze drifted across the camp, taking in the faces of those around him. For the first time, he saw them not as a band of rogues, but as something larger. A collection of lives tied together by a shared purpose, or at least by the need to survive. He found Bryn tending to her arrows near the edge of the ravine, her movements precise and deliberate. She glanced up as he approached, offering a faint nod. "You're thinking again," she said, her tone light but edged with weariness. "Always dangerous," Aldric replied, lowering himself to sit across from her. His eyes lingered on the bough resting beside her. "You've been with the Brotherhood longer than I have. How many are we, really?" Bryn paused, her fingers brushing against the fletching of an arrow. 73, she said finally. 73 that we count. A few more who keep to the edges, scouts, messengers. They come and go. Aldric tilted his head, absorbing the number. It was larger than he had imagined, but smaller than he had hoped. 73 against the king's forces. Not the odds I'd choose. Bryn let out a quiet laugh, though there was no humor in it. If we waited for better odds, we'd still be hiding in the caves outside Redwater. Aldric caught the flicker of something in her expression, an echo of weariness that went deeper than the battle they'd just fought. "You've seen a lot of this, haven't you?" "Too much." She shifted her gaze to the forest beyond the ravine. "We weren't always this big. When I joined, it was barely 20 of us, clinging to the idea of rebellion. Malrik changed that. He gave us focus." Aldric nodded, though he felt the weight of her unspoken words. Focus wasn't always the same as unity. Later, Aldric found himself sitting by the largest fire pit, the flames casting faint warmth across the circle of fighters gathered there. Thane and Jory sat nearby, the latter nursing a skin of wine with exaggerated care. 73, Jory announced, raising the skin like a toast. "That's the count, knight. 73 rebels, thieves, and fools, still breathing after tonight's chaos. Not bad, if I do say so myself. Could have been 74 if Malrik wasn't so fond of ending loose ends," Thane added, his tone wry. Aldric looked between them, his brow furrowing. "Is 73 supposed to be impressive?" "It's better than where we started," Jory replied, grinning around the mouth of the wineskin. "Back then, it was just me, Malrik, and a handful of others trying not to die. Now we've got people to sharpen our swords and patch our boots. Feels almost civilized." Thane smirked. "Civilized until someone decides to challenge Malrik's authority. That's when things get interesting." Aldric frowned. "And how often does that happen?" "More than you'd think," Thane said, his smirk fading. "Less than it should." The words lingered between them, and Aldric found himself staring into the fire. He had been with the Brotherhood long enough to see its strengths, but the cracks were becoming harder to ignore. A group this large carried weight, and not everyone would pull in the same direction. As the camp quieted for the night, Aldric's thoughts returned to his own role within the Brotherhood. He had been a knight, sworn to the crown, trusted by the king himself. They had called him the King's Sword, the man who delivered justice at the sharpest edge. Yet here he was, an outlaw among outlaws, his honor tarnished and his loyalty fractured. Thane's voice broke the silence. "You ever wonder why Malrik wanted you? Why he risked breaking into Greystone Keep for a knight who was supposedly a traitor?" Aldric looked up, meeting Thane's curious gaze. "I stopped wondering about Malrik's motives the day I realized they don't matter. Jory chuckled, swirling the last of the wine in the skin. Oh, they matter, knight. Malrik doesn't do anything unless it serves him. He brought you in because he needed you. For what? Aldric asked. Thane leaned forward, his voice lowering. Because you're a symbol. The king's sword, turned against the crown. You're proof that even the best can see through the lies. People rally behind that. Aldric leaned back, his expression thoughtful. He hadn't considered himself a symbol, just a man trying to survive. But as the firelight flickered in Thane's eyes, he realized that survival might not be enough anymore. The next morning, Aldric stood near the edge of the ravine, his gaze fixed on the forest beyond. Malrik approached, his steps deliberate, his presence commanding even in the quiet. He came to a stop beside Aldric, his piercing blue eyes scanning the horizon. You're up early, Malrik said. Aldric shrugged. Couldn't sleep. Too much to think about. Malrik's lips twitched into a faint smirk. That's your first mistake. Thinking doesn't solve anything out here. 73, Aldric said, the number weighted on his tongue. Not just a band of outlaws anymore. This is something bigger. Malrik's smirk faded, replaced by a sharper edge. It's survival. Don't mistake it for something noble. 73 lives, Aldric said, turning to face him. That's more than survival. That's a responsibility. Malrik's gaze narrowed, his expression unreadable. And whose responsibility do you think it is? Mine? Yours? Because the king doesn't care about numbers, knight. He'll crush us whether we're 20 or 200. Aldric met his gaze, unflinching. Not if we outthink him. Malrik let out a low chuckle, though there was no humor in it. Outthink him, huh? You sound like Bryn. She's always got ideas about how we should be doing things differently. Maybe she's right. Or maybe you're both too new to realize this fight doesn't have room for idealists. The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Aldric didn't respond, and after a moment, Malrik turned and walked away, leaving him alone with his thoughts. As the sun began its slow climb over the horizon, Aldric watched the camp stir to life. The Brotherhood was larger than he had imagined, but its unity was fragile. Malrik's leadership held them together, but only just, and Aldric couldn't shake the feeling that someone, was pulling them apart. The king's forces were regrouping. That much was certain. And when they came again, 73 might not be enough. Thank you for listening. Please like and subscribe.